Okay, we're going to start, guys. Good afternoon. I'd like to go ahead and call to order the November Planning Commission meeting for the town of Kiowa Island. And I'll ask Ms. Reynolds, would you be so kind to call the roll, please?
Mr. Babby.
Here.
Mr. Badnett. Here. Mr. Kelly.
Here.
Mr. Conley.
Here.
Dr. Curran.
Here.
Ms. Kennedy.
Here.
Mr. Owen.
Here. All here and accounted for. Okay, our first agenda item is the approval of the October minutes.
So moved.
I have a motion. Okay, I have a second.
Second.
Okay, questions, comments regarding that particular monthly meeting? Anyone? Oh, moving right along.
Two in a row.
Well done, Petra.
We're setting a trend here. I like it.
Hey, nobody said anything about my town council minutes either, and they were 10 pages long.
We love it. Okay, all those in favor of approval of the minutes for October, say aye.
Aye.
Okay, thank you. Public comments. Anyone from the public have any comments regarding any items on our agenda today? Please let us know. None? We get a second chance again at the end, so if you got any thoughts, we give it out then. Okay, old business. John.
Afternoon, Commissioners. Our old business is just a Kiowa Next update. As you know, we had our workshop feels like last week, but it might have been a week, 2 weeks ago. We're still making those edits based on all the received comments and discussion. What I did want to do is just provide that we will be scheduling what sort of a hybrid, I'll share that with you guys via email, a hybrid public drop-in session that would allow folks to gain some understanding of where we are, principally on the goals and objectives, as I think those are pretty solid based on our conversation during our last workshop. And then post that particular workshop, we have it in mind to present back to you guys at our December Planning Commission meeting. So within 2 weeks, we should have that document back to you guys, ready to go for at least one more time to look at it before you guys make any decisions on it that forwards it to council or anything, but I think we are in a good place based on our conversations that we had at our last workshop session. One thing that I did want to highlight that came sort of from the discussion period, the alliance, that was something that, the Kiowa Island Alliance, that was a big part of the discussion. So when we do bring that back, I want to make sure that everyone's kind of comfortable with that framework, that concept. The second thing that I took away, and this was a follow-up from Ms. Hennessy, sent the email regarding the conservation designation associated with Parks and Rec in the zoning district. I shared an email with you guys to say, hey, I'll provide sort of a memo and kind of provide some additional detail that gives us a little bit better understanding of how both our land use is married to our zoning districts. So that's what that handout is in front of you. And just briefly, I'll highlight that and offer just a few suggestions or recommendations for a path forward. One of the things that I did was just highlight just some key terms and principles that gives us a clear understanding. I thought there was some misconception of what zoning is versus land use designation, how it folds into the comprehensive plan. So that's what this document kind of references. The one thing I do want to highlight is that park and open space on Kiowa is fundamentally different than what you would see in a traditional sense of Euclidean zoning, of where a park is carved out based on a use type. Since Kiowa's development patterns and its inception, this goes all the way back to the plan development, there's a priority to put park and open space throughout Kiowa, sprinkling it throughout the island, not just dedicated or carved out. I want you to stay with me here thinking about the city of New York, where there's a big open park in the center of the island, but majority of everything else is developed. Imagine that Central Park is cascaded throughout the entire city. That's what Kiowa has done in its sort of development patterns. So that's why if you look at our zoning code, every zoning district on the island has the PR designation in it. So what I'm recommending I'm only hitting highlights of this document. What I'm recommending is that we wouldn't remove the PR designation from every zoning category, but begin an exercise post the Kiowa Next comprehensive plan update, where we really go and scrub our section 103, which is our use table. That use table really would, I think the goal is to really ensure that there's compatibility between residential, whether it's conservation or open space, really ensuring that there's compatibility between the uses. And that's how that's achieved through our zoning district in that section 103. And so after this, that's already been a process that we've started internally, but it's been sort of paused just to try to get us through the comprehensive plan update. The last thing that I'll say, I think there is good rationale for that Parks and Recreation zoning district to be removed from the conservation land use category for the reasons that we discussed regarding environmentally sensitive and the footprint of any either human activity or development activity that may occur in a conservation area. So I think that can be supported. However, I just said I didn't want to recommend us removing the park designation from every single category across Kiowa. So on page 3 of this, we don't have to go into discussion about this today, but this is a first flush of trying to marry our land use categories with our zoning districts. And so when we bring this back, I'll just ask that you kind of just share with me individually your thoughts on trying to marry our zoning districts with our land use categories. These land use categories on the left-hand side of that column they range from our residential categories to our commercial, and then what I would say are less intense uses of active recreation, open space, and conservation. And then on the right-hand side, you see how the zoning districts match up. What this does is gives staff the framework of when there is any development proposals of how that consistency and compatibility is measured. So for example, the unique thing, you look at low-density residential. What's listed there is under R1, PR, PROC. PROC is added to that. That's a new zoning district that was established 2019, I believe, 2018. This is specifically just before the PGA. These are where the cottages are on the ocean course, that specific zoning district for that area. Even though that they are primarily used for open space, there are residential opportunities on that lot. So what this does is just gives you an opportunity to see which zoning districts, and once you go into the actual standards of that zoning districts, the actual uses, then is where I think you would be able to find how to customize, how to really restrict, add conditions to get that compatibility that we try to achieve for Kiowa.
Yeah, I just want to understand, if you have PR as a zoning district for R1, does that mean someone developing an R1 district has the right to a PR designation as well and can use all the permitted uses that are in PR?
So that's the difference between the land use category and the zoning district. So I'm going to take a step back here. The zoning category is thinking as a town, when we think about the uses for an area or what could go there, these are all of the options. So that's kind of the starting point. Once you actually get to the zoning code, our zoning districts actually fine tune those options. So and I'll spell this out. If you look at I should have had the copy of our section 103, but under PR, R1, R2, the parks, that's not allowed use in that section. Even though PR zoning district is married to the land use category of low density residential, the actual development of a park that is associated with recreational uses is not an allowed use under that zoning designation.
Under R1?
Under R1.
Right, parks are allowed, but not all the other uses
So
of PR. Park isn't allowed
a park
use
is
at all.
allowed. The one thing the one thing that I should add there is how we measure parks in our zoning code. For Kiowa, I would say there's a standard passive park, but there's also the elevated recreational activities of park. And so where you see more active recreation, those associated uses of active recreation are not coupled in those residential zoning district areas.
I think we'll need to go into this, probably not today, in a little more depth, because my concern is that Keo is mostly built up now, and I can see where you said originally you have this big island and you want parks scattered throughout, and that might have been part of the driving force of putting in those zoning districts. Is that relevant today? Maybe not, but I think this is something we need to look at in a little more detail.
Yeah, that was my specific recommendation of us really looking at the use table and identifying from a principal point and looking at land use pattern. I think that's a valid point. Where we are today versus 20 years ago is a significant difference. The one thing that I think should be retained in all of this is that the idea of redevelopment, even though the land use patterns probably won't change, of having that concept of open space throughout every zoning district so that it gives the essence of what Kiowa represents, natural vegetation throughout but yes, we'll put that down.
Well, I think, Mr. Farrell sent us all a note in talking about narrowing the definitions just because it's easier to say, oh, you're R1, you want to add open space. Well, we're going to approve it. But given some of the issues that have come up, maybe given this is a long-term plan, maybe it's time to change what's in the ZLDR from this to a more restrictive list.
Yeah, and that's, so in this particular just draft memo here, that is the goal and objective from a planning staff standpoint. Once we get through the comprehensive plan, we really want to go back and refine that uses. That exercise hasn't been done, at least since I've been part of the town, and I think it's an appropriate time post a comprehensive plan update to do that. So all of the uses, whether they be permitted by right, whether they be permitted by conditional use or special exception, are there any uses that we want to further restrict? And I mean, like, those are the exercises that I would want the town to partake in as we complete the comprehensive plan process.
But I think having it in the comprehensive plan, that's my concern, because that is a guiding document.
No.
So we'll talk more about it.
Yeah, I just don't want to, the notion was confusing zoning with the land uses in the comprehensive plan, which are two different things. That's the distinction I was really trying to make here, yeah.
John, before you run, you mentioned that the language change for the adoption of the Kiowa Alliance will be somehow displayed to the Planning Commission. When is that going to happen? Is that going to happen before the public comments are received or after?
Yeah, I've been working with Stephanie to make sure that we get all of our notes on the same page to make sure that we're in alignment. I don't want to give you a date today, but it would be, I think, in the next couple of weeks that we'll have that document specifically around the framework of the Kiowa Island Alliance. I think from what we heard during the workshop session is balancing not becoming too restrictive, and it's not restrictive, not becoming too overhanded in this, in sort of handicapping that ability for them to engage in how they, as the entities align together, not being too specific to put in what times they should meet and those types of things. So I think the framework is still pretty broad, keeping it as broad as nature, and I think that's what we heard. So I think there won't be a whole lot of change.
But answer the question, are we going to see it before the
But you will
public
see it
sees
before your December meeting, yes.
But not before the public sees it?
Yes, that, we'll share it before the public sees it, yes. We will share it, yes, we'll share
So
it before then.
we'll get a memo or an email or
We'll send
something?
it to you guys before we release it to
And
the
we'll
public.
get you comments back before it goes public?
Sure, yeah.
Okay.
Fair enough. Go ahead, Ron.
So this, in this table, and this is in the comprehensive plan.
Yeah, so one of the things is that typically you won't see specific zoning districts enumerated in a comprehensive plan. You would only see the land use pattern. But I felt the need that maybe we do include it just so that we are consistent. This table is actually within our zoning code. So really, it should be in the zoning code because it references, but I don't have an issue with it being in both the comprehensive plan and the
And this
zoning
is,
code.
this, as it stands right now, this is what's in the zoning.
This is actually modified from what's actually in there today. This was based on what I kind of heard, like the PR was removed from the conservation under this, if you look at this table.
Okay.
So,
PROC was added, I don't, unless I'm remembering wrong, I don't have it. in
no,
front of me.
PRC was.
PROC, but that wasn't in.
Yeah, that wasn't in, that's a zoning designation. That should have been updated when we installed that new zoning category in this table. So it's not in the current version of the comp plan that you see there.
Yeah, because I hadn't seen that before.
Okay, before John leaves the subject, any other comments regarding this? We're okay? Okay, John, thank you. John, let's switch over to new business.
Awesome. So our new business, this is a proposed text amendment. We're not going to have any sort of action taken today on the proposed text amendment. What staff wanted to do is just introduce from a timeline standpoint what we've instituted and going through this particular process of phase 2 of establishing landscape standards. If you all recall, Town Council, they adopted our tree preservation and landscaping standard ordinance earlier this year. The first component of that really focused on tree preservation. This phase 2 of it focused on landscape standards. And so today, I provided in your materials just sort of a brief update on the timeline. So just ensure that next month, when you guys review this, there's an understanding that this isn't something that just fell off and we're just like 2 weeks, but there's been a subcommittee established, and that subcommittee work group has representation from many of the Ks on the island, as well as professional staff, including also members of our planning commission. We anticipate that that particular document will go before the Landscape and Tree Preservation Board on November 19th. And the expectation is that that board will review it as part of when the first phase of that ordinance was established. The authority and purview for the Landscape and Tree Preservation Board, we gave them the opportunity to provide recommendations on how that particular ordinance would be in effect. And so that's what they would be doing, reviewing and ensuring that, hey, this makes sense from the landscaping and tree preservation application perspective. After that, we'll bring that back in December. So December 4th, we'll have that prepared for you guys to take action as a recommendation. And with your blessing, we'll anticipate that to go to council's agenda for January of next year. The significant components to phase 2, really, and most of this I'll allude to Patria St. John on as our planner has been focusing on this, working with that work group. Really considers the applicability of non-single family, so it marries to what phase 1 was. So single family residential wouldn't be one of the applicable uses for this particular ordinance, as consistent with the current tree preservation ordinance. And then secondly, just an emphasis on being grow native and native plants. It would incorporate noun standards for shrubs and grass and ground cover, as well as planting and landscape associated with parking. And then the final designation that landscape standards or requirements is now attached to a final certificate of occupancy. So we're really putting a lot of pressure to make sure that those landscape standards are met and consistent before that final CO is issued. And I'll pause, and if any of our representatives, Dr. Curran, Mr. Iwan, wanted to share anything. We do have Greg Darris here, who serves also on the Tree Preservation Board, present. So I don't know if any of you guys want to add any comments, as there was just kind of an update for today. That's really what this was about.
John, I just have, I'm trying to really understand emphasis on grow native and native plants. I understand native plants. I'm trying to figure out grow native.
So Grow Native is an actual program that the town instituted. It hasn't been it's shown its peaks and valleys of implementation, but the Grow Native program, which was funneled through Jim Jordan and our wildlife biologists and the environmental folks, was actual program that we just promoted native plants on the island. So the Grow Native refers to actual program.
Okay,
And native plants is,
okay, that's what,
that should have been capitalized, and Grow
I
Native
was
should
gonna
have been
say, maybe
capitalized.
if it was capitalized, that
Yeah.
would, yeah.
Okay, any other comments?
Any thoughts of how soon you're going to turn around and then apply this to single-family homes for the tree and for the landscape? Because it feels like we're missing a large opportunity by not applying it to single-family homes.
I would pose that question to town council. I think our last recommendation is that we wanted to at least give some time to see its effect. I can say that as part of this, Patria, and she does get a lot of calls now about tree removals. So contractors are aware that before they begin taking out a tree, that they at least do contact the town, or she'll do a site visit, sometimes simultaneously with the ARB on pre-development for projects. So it is out there that this ordinance is in effect. Whether or not it's applicable to a single family, I think it honestly will be just tied to what this transition period of the ARB is and its outcome. If that materializes in one way, I can see this applying to single family immediately. If it doesn't, I can see this just still being applying to non-single family.
Okay,
I think the short answer to that is it may never happen.
okay. John, if you move on to development project updates, as well as anything you'd like to update the commissioners on from the brief 4.5-hour town council meeting yesterday. That was for you, Luke.
Just substantial projects that I will highlight. We have had 2 pre-application meetings regarding substantial projects. One of those would be Fresh Fields, a new restaurant. There have been no formal submission regarding that new restaurant, which would have been sited across from, just to orient you, across from Cantina 76 in that vacant parcel in between, adjacent to the lagoon. There hasn't been any formal submission of any plans. That was almost a month or 2 ago, but that was one of the pre-application meetings that we have had. The second is Roy Barth Tennis Center renovations, where they're adding padel courts and sort of a renovation to the existing facility. We've had a pre-application with the design team for that particular project. Just the status quo on the other 2 substantial projects that are underway, Seafields, MUSC, Seafields, in conversation with our building official, they are moving at a swift pace. And for MUSC, they have already broken ground and they're doing their site development. So those 2 projects, MUSC, we anticipate now a new substantial completion date of beginning of 2026. We also just received our sort of 30-day window. If you recall, the Keel Island Golf Resort a year ago did propose plans for Mingo Point in their dock. So they will be sometime in December. We haven't gotten the final exact timeline or window, but in December, they will be providing the update to that particular project at Mingo Point for the dock. The other 2 projects that I think most are interested in, Beachwalker Drive, those are still in a sort of a limbo of us waiting or engaging with the developer to provide exhibits that match up to the actual agreement that town council approved in October, our October meeting. So we're just sort of going back and forth to refine those documents. And as that was, if you listen into yesterday's town council meeting, that update was provided. That it's just sort of a period of us trying to get to those refined documents before it can be submitted through the courts. Regarding town council updates, I don't know if you wanted to, if you were present to do, okay, so 2 ordinances that you all favored recommendation for, one in July, which was our pervious impervious paving requirements. There was a lot of discussion on there. It did receive first reading approval. I anticipate some changes. There'll be some additional dialogue, I think, behind the scenes of trying to, based on the conversation heard, there were some concerns of potential costs, burden to the property owners, the effects long-term of where we are in our build-out phase of Kiowa, the requirements of making that a requirement when there's not a whole lot of new development remaining. There are also some concerns of, or not concerns, but maybe there's additional incentives that we could explore for this particular purpose. But I thought we did receive a well engaged council discussion on it. And so that'll continue. Anticipate that to be discussed further at our December town council meeting. The second amendment, non-conforming uses and non-conforming structures. If you recall, this was a text amendment that was proposed subsequent to the filed suit from Timbers regarding the rezonings that occurred post ARDA, or amended and restated development agreement. And so that received first reading approval of that text amendment. And that gives, I think, all of the things from a planning standpoint, that updates that I have.
Okay. We'll move on to public comments. Anyone have any comments? Give your name and address if you would.
Todd Bonet, 3532 Shipwatch, and this may be more a question for John, but when we're talking about single-family residential, what about regimes like Seascape, John, are the regimes in a condo building or a multifamily situation like that subject to the tree ordinance now?
Yes, so those would be treated as non-single family.
Okay. Thank you.
So the application of the ordinance as written today would be non-single family. So any multifamily structures would be subject to.
Any other questions? Luke?
Luke Farrell, 101 GoldenEye, in my capacity as a citizen. I wanted to talk about the land use and the zoning categories that John mentioned. I've been corresponding with folks on the island about this. I think what John said is correct. The intent when the island was built out was to have open space and not be dense and have different activities going on. As I found out going through mediation, the devil's really in the details. And so going through the land use permitted and conditional, that table is very important to get this squared away. Parks and recreation isn't the same as parks in a R1 space. So I would encourage you to look very closely at those use tables and distinguish between permitted parks and parks and rec. And for example, the thing that you'll find is if you do an R1 that allows PR, there can be a commercial pool built on that lot. And I don't think that's the type of thing you want to do. If the lot is meant to be open space and preserved or not preserved, that'd be great. So there might be a need for an open space category in the land use that accomplishes what the director of planning is trying to accomplish. But allowing it to be parks and rec down the column for all zoning is probably not what we want because of the broad flexibility it gives anybody in the neighborhood. Thank you.
Good point. Thank you, Luke. Any other comments from our residents? If not, thank you all for giving us your afternoon. And we'll move on to commissioner comments, and we'll start. Andy?
I have no comments until we see further drafts of the comprehensive plan material
plan.
that'll be displayed to the public in general in the form of the comprehensive plan.
Okay. Thank you. Dr. Curran?
Yeah, and this is more of a question to John. I've heard some discussion that Kika wants to build another recreation facility. Has there been actually any specific application or anything? And will the town have any jurisdiction over that?
No and no.
If
Jurisdiction.
the community association is looking to do any development within the town's jurisdiction, yes, we would be the one reviewing and permitting that particular project, but we have not received any proposed plans or engagements around any particular designs or building.
Thank you.
Thank you for clearing that up, John. Joanne?
No, just thank you for your comments as a citizen, Luke. We will be looking at that, and maybe John, I'll sit down with John and we'll look in more detail on how those, because I agree with you that the flexibility needs to be reviewed. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. John?
I wasn't able to go to town council yesterday, and I haven't watched the video, but I'm curious if there was any discussion about the planned medical facility up here along Betsy Carrison.
Yeah, since we got all the material, it'd be nice.
There was not a position or anything taken by town council on that proposed medical village. We wanted to provide, a staff provided you guys, as you are connected to the community, to inform people of that. That meeting's on November 18th. Just so everyone's aware, the proposal is consistent, or let me not say consistent, it is exactly the same proposal that was submitted back in beginning of the year. The county council at that time voted to disapprove the proposed plan development, and that failed on a 4-3 vote. At the time, the developer provided what's being labeled in the community as concessions. Those concessions were submitted sort of at that same meeting, but that's not what county council officially voted on. So even though that the concessions have been out there for a year, there's been no change since January to those. So that's what the uproar I think that you're hearing, is that it's essentially the same proposal that will be going back before Planning Commission at the county.
John, on that point, the staff rejection of this revised plan basically cited the height of buildings. Does that mean all of the other items, the environmental issues, the traffic issues and everything that were covered by a lot of appendices to that submission, does that mean they were accepted?
No, so staff's recommendations was consistent with their previous recommendation, and that's all fundamentally based on its compatibility to surrounding and adjacent uses. So the scale and scope of what's being presented as part of that application was inconsistent, and so that's what staff has said. Even with the reduction in the number of residential units or the reduction in some of the commercial square footage, they still felt that it was inconsistent with the compatible neighborhood.
But there was other conditions on the resubmission.
Yes, there.
Were satisfied or not. I mean, the question there is, with all the exhibits, did the staff agree with those, or did they not agree?
So staff provided that basic recommendation of disapproval, but if you look in the bottom portions of that particular document, they provided if this plan development were approved, this is what we recommend should be changed. I think those would be some of the things that you should pay attention to. I don't think that there's a definitive, because some of those are just not necessarily zoning related. Those are more either technical site planning as far as requirements of how much space that you need for your own sewer plant and those types of things. So, but staff's recommendation does include conditions if it were approved that are recommended.
That, the staff also said categorically that it should be denied because it's inconsistent with the Charleston County Comprehensive Plan. And one would hope that that alone would be, otherwise why do a comprehensive plan? And I think that impacts what we're all doing here. If you're going to have a comprehensive plan, you want it to be enforced.
Yeah, the inconsistency with the comprehensive plan is it's looking at the compatible uses adjacent to. So that's how the county has formally made that recommendation of them looking at the area around it, this particular development, and how that is compatible with the adjacency. There is not a definitive whether or not this goes up or down. The Planning Commission, like I said, will hear it. They could keep the same recommendation that they provided. I'll save my comments of what I think this is ending up after we discuss. But I think ultimately the planning commission will make a recommendation and it'll go back before county council.
Okay, thank you, John. John, any other comments?
No, that's it.
Gene?
No comments.
Larry?
Yeah, John, first question is that, I can direct it to Luke if you'd like. The first question is that the impervious surface, that's a text amendment to this current zoning, is that what that is now?
Correct.
Okay, so this is, we separated that off from the water runoff project that we're continuing on.
management.
That we're stormwater runoff, is that correct?
Correct. So that is a narrow scope of our broader plans of accomplishing stormwater. That's one metric that the marsh management plan recognized of permeable surfaces. We will be bringing back the recommendation that you all have favorable of the stormwater application back before council for them to consider that. But you're correct. This is just sort of one aspect of the greater resiliency efforts connected to stormwater.
Okay, and I was happy to see, I played the podcast on impervious surfaces. That was, and I think that's the kind of communication we need to get out to the community in order to educate and generate interest in the community to support these kind of, so I applaud, I don't know, was that the town or was that? Who?
I'll just say hats off to our communications team, Neil primarily, who did all the interviews and production behind that. We just provided sort of a script and
That's great.
let him.
And having a citizen, personal experience comment on it, I think was very, it gave it a lot of credibility. So I hope as we continue down this path, we'll continue to do that type of thing.
Thank you.
John, before you run, the only thing I'd add, Larry, on that one, it's great to see the podcast, but there's a lot of people who don't. And in the newsletter we put out, or the town notes that you put out, it says these items were discussed, but there's no indication of what was discussed or how the items were discussed in general. What are the issues? What are the answers? I know that you don't get answers at the podcast, but at least when you put out the information on the town notes, it would be helpful if you gave some sort of a summary of what the issues were or what the concerns were, rather than just say, well, we discussed X, Y, and Z.
You said for like a proposed text amendment that went to council and opposed to it saying
Doesn't have
council
to be the whole
discusses.
text amendment, but just a brief sentence or two explaining what the issue is.
Yeah, Andy, the podcast was only to explain, to have an experience and explain to the community,
Previous minute.
what they are, how they can be used, what benefits they have, and there was a citizen doing a personal testimonial towards it.
Oh, which is valuable, but
Yeah,
it
but
would help if you had
I would just
some
say that, I think
understanding
that,
if you didn't see it.
but I think that was just one tool of many in the communication strategy. That was a tool, not the tool.
No, but with that tool, even to make it as valuable as it could be, you've got to give some explanation other than say it was discussed.
Sounds like a volunteer for your communication committee.
Thank you. All right. Oh, absolutely.
Again, Todd Bonet, 3532 Shipwatch. One of the things that I'm working with John on is there was a regime council that was, active in the past. It kind of died away. We're kicking this off again. So if you look at the regimes, represent about 40% of the dwelling units on the island. So one of the things that we're going to be working with John on is, getting the communication out about, things like the tree ordinance, pervious, impervious, surfaces. One of our objectives here is to share experiences, good and bad, and also to try and make communication with the various authorities much more efficient. So, John, I think it's definitely something we need to talk about then, especially if the regimes are subject to the tree ordinance. So we'll schedule something for January. But we're working with John and the ARB and trying to make some of what is going on more effective and more efficient across the community.
Yeah, hasn't Patria been doing one-on-one, not like group sessions? Hasn't she been going to some of those? And
Yeah.
I think should be a great resource to do that.
Yeah, but, it's to make the board, each of the board members and the boards more effective, and also to make sure that our communication with the property manager is more effective as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, Luke, please.
Sorry, I'll be quick. I know we're past the half hour. With regard to the pervious proposal, some of the things we discussed yesterday in town council were, first and foremost, the idea is a great concept to help with stormwater runoff and manage that. The things that we struggled with were the effectiveness and how much we'd accomplish with the ordinance. And I think, and I even had this in the back of my mind, I think the number was quoted that 15 or 18% of the covered surfaces on the island are driveways. But we're not going to go through and replace all those driveways with pervious driveways. It might happen, but you think about a driveway, it has like a 30-year life. So it will take a long time. So the replacement cycle is not where the big hit's going to be. It's going to be the new installations. And again, if I remember the numbers correctly, there's 4,500 built-out units, and only about 350 units left to be built out. So when you think about that 15 or 18% or whatever the number is, what you're saving going forward is maybe 1% or 2% in lot coverage or in island coverage. That was a concern because you're not increasing, you're just slowing the decrease of covered surfaces. The other thing we talked about a lot was the cost. And the cost, as we found out, seemed to be a lot higher because the preparation of the soil goes down 12 or 14 inches, and it has 3 or 4 different substrates where a traditional concrete, you just pour new sand, level it, and you pour concrete on top of that. And the places where we saw the oldest driveways were the places that were the smaller, the older lots where maybe those people don't have the same wherewithal as the folks building out in Ocean Park who couldn't put a pervious driveway in. And then we questioned what else is there where we can have an impact on reducing stormwater runoff. And what happens even after you have pavers or pervious concrete? What's the maintenance cost to maintain the perviousness? And what happens once the ground gets saturated? You still have water runoff, whether it's pervious or impervious. It doesn't matter. After you have a rain of 12 inches and tomorrow it rains another 12 inches, that second rain, it's all going into the lagoons or to the stormwater system. So those were the things we were debating. It wasn't whether it was a good idea or not. It was more about what was the impact that this ordinance would have on new construction, remodeling. We thought it for the resort and any development there would be awesome. So it was a kind of a commercial versus single family discussion as well. But at the end of the day, we do think it's a good idea to think about these things. We just maybe were challenged to think about, is this the one that had the highest impact in the near term?
Yeah, I mean, that's why I separated my question into, is this been pulled off? Because we see the managing the stormwater runoff as a bigger picture, a bigger item. This was spun off as what we would call low-hanging fruit. You know, it could be done fairly quickly, and yes, it's not the answer, but you know, it's also a start. So,
It's the first step.
First step.
Yep.
So, yeah, we're 100% with you. We know we've got a lot more work to do with that, but this wasn't. We didn't think this was the end, the solution to the stormwater management.
It's great to hear. Thank you.
I think I said that right.
Yes, you did. Good job.
Thank you, Luke. And thank you to the commissioners and to our residents for their comments. This brings our meeting to a close, and I'd like to have a motion for adjournment.
So moved.
Second?
Second. Record time.
We're over. Record time.
No.
No, we've not. Yeah.